Hi there, welcome to QA Box Let's Test. If you have not already subscribed to this channel, kindly do so. And if you like the video, give them the thumbs up. Alright, so in this video, we are going to talk about another interesting library, which is Chai-jQuery. And when writing integration test, you will likely work a lot with the DOM. So Chai-jQuery library is going to help us in achieving this. Chai-jQuery is an extension to Chai assertion library that provides a set of jQuery-specific assertions. So this far we have covered quite a lot, right? So we have talked about Mocha, then we talked about Chai assertion library, then we wrote some basic unit test cases, and then we moved on to advanced unit test cases using the library descendant, through which we wrote stubs, spies, and mocks. Then in the previous video, we wrote data-driven test, and therein we introduced one end-to-end test tool, which is Cypress. So behind the scenes, even Cypress uses Chai-jQuery library to assert the DOM elements. So first thing, what are we going to assert on the DOM? So we are going to assert the attribute, the properties, right? The data which is attached to a particular DOM element. We are also going to test the CSS that is attached to a DOM element. We can test the class ID, we can test the HTML attached to a DOM element, we can verify the text, we can verify another property which is value. Then we can move on and check the state of the element, for example, whether it's visible or hidden, or if it's a checkbox, is it checked or selected, if it's a button, whether it's enabled or disabled, right? And that's applicable to other controls as well. You can also check for whether a control exists or not. If a control exists, whether it's empty or it contains any text node, or for that matter, any other element node. Then we can also go for using these methods like match and contain, and we're going to see that. We can also check whether a DOM element has further descendants or not, or is it focused or not. So these are few things that we are going to do. But if you're a beginner to all this, then let's understand this by example. So what are different things that we are going to check? So if I just click on this password thing, let's say, let me just expand this slightly. So you could see that this is an input element. So this is called as element node, all right? And this type equal to password. So type is basically the attribute node, and password is basically the value. Okay, so so we have talked about element node and attribute node. Let us see text node as well. So on this page, if I just inspect this, okay, so this becomes your text node, right? Now where are the properties? So to understand that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to identify this element. So this has got the ID login one, and it is of type input. So if you go to console, and this is how you're going to identify that element. And if you do a dot, all right, so you see that these are all the different properties that are available, and except align, alt, base URI, and so on. Let's see that herein we have this property max length is equal to 30. All right, so this is an attribute, but at the same time it's a property as well, and we're going to understand the difference between attribute and property in a while. So if I just come here in console and say max length, so you could see that I can retrieve it. So, and that's how we access a property on an object in JavaScript. Okay, so now the next thing then is, so what is the difference between attribute and property? And they are basically two methods into jQuery, right? To read or work on these two different things, attribute and property. So they are attr, all right, and prop. Okay, and when we call them as method, which means that they would be invoked and they have the parentheses afterward. All right, while invoking. So what attributes actually are? So attributes carry additional information about an HTML element and come in name value pairs. You can set an attribute for an HTML element and define it when writing the source code, right? When writing the HTML source code. So in this particular example, okay, so this type is equal to text, ID is equal to login one. These are called as attributes. So what are the properties? Properties are representation of an attribute in the HTML DOM tree. Once the browser passes your HTML code, the corresponding DOM node will be created that is an object, thus having properties. Okay, so now what is the difference between this attr and prop method in jQuery, because that causes a lot of confusion to a lot of people. So this since attribute method attr method gives you the value of an element as it was defined in the HTML on page load. It is always now then because this attr always work on the original value, and this prop basically that always work on the current value. All right, so depending upon the context, right, it's kind of recommended basically that you always use prop. uh, so it is always recommended to use prop to get the values of element modified via JavaScript, jQuery in the browser at runtime. So it always keeps the current state value. Okay, so the prop method returns a boolean value for these checked, selected, disabled, uh, you know read only, and so on, while attribute method returns a defined string. So you can directly use dot prop and then these visible and checked in an if condition if you are a developer. Then you have got another other properties like selected index, tag name, node type, owner document default check, and so on, should be retrieved and set with the prop method. These do not have corresponding attributes and are only properties. So attribute, another interesting thing is attribute calls prop internally. So attribute method would be slightly slower than accessing them directly through prop. So that's why it's recommended that go for this prop way rather than attr way. Okay, but if you just want to check the original value, right, then if it's not already updated, then you can use both, right? But if it gets updated, for example, let us look at this case, right? So herein, if I you could see that currently the value inside this so there's a value attribute, all right, which has got this value first. So if I click on this, both attr and prop will give us the same value. But if I change it to, let's say, test, now let's see the difference. So attr will still carry the original value, but prop will have the latest value now. Okay, so if you have to work on the original value once it gets updated, then you have to use attr. In all other cases, you can go for prop. All right, so we have understood different types of nodes. We have understood the difference between properties and attribute. We've also understood the difference between attr and prop. These are from jQuery, right? And because this is a combination of Chai and jQuery, so we are going to use a lot of methods available into jQuery. Okay, enough theory. Let's now start working on this. So on the left hand side, what you're seeing is it's a suite which contains different test cases, and as you could see that the suite contains test case for attribute and for data, CS, and so on. So in some of the test cases, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a change, and what will happen then? So on the right hand side, what you're seeing is the summary of the test cases. So you could see that there are in total 66 test cases which are being passed and one is being failed. And anytime I fail a test case, you will see that the summary is being updated. Okay, this is how it's going to work. But because there are so many things which are self-explanatory, for example, I'll show you the visible test case and then hidden would be kind of just opposite of it. For example, in the vision there are two elements, one is visible and the other one is hidden. So in visible I'm going to check that, hey, this should be visible and the other one should not be visible. And in case of hidden, I'm going to say, hey, this should be hidden and the other one should not be hidden. All right, so this is how we are going to say, we are going to write one test case and then we are going to write the negation of that test case. That's how this whole thing is set up. All right, so let's start working on these. So the first one in the list is attribute. Okay, and it basically asserts the first element of the selection, and using the attr method which I just talked about. Optionally, assert a particular value as well. The return value is available for chaining. So let's understand this. So here is our subject. Okay, and what are we doing in here? So we are saying that this subject, and subject is nothing, it's an element, right? And this is how you can access an element into jQuery, right? So if you're not watched my video, and if you don't know about how to access element into jQuery, then definitely go and watch my video on jQuery. So this is how you're going to retrieve the subject. And then what are you doing in here? You are saying that, hey, check whether this subject have got this attribute name. Okay, so internally this thing is calling the jQuery attribute method. All right, the other is the negation of it, and here we are checking that this element should not have the attribute bar. All right, and hence you are seeing in here, so it's correct and right, and this one is also correct. So if I just change it to name one, let's say, okay, and I just save this, run it, so now you could see that this is being failed. All right, so we're working on attribute because, okay, so let me change it back to one. So this is how we are going to cover it. So the next one, data. Assert that the first element of the selection has the given data value using dot data method from jQuery. Again, optionally assert a particular value as well. The return value is available for chaining. But what does this data method do behind the scenes? So jQuery data method allows us to attach data of any type to DOM element in a way that is safe from circular references and therefore free from memory leaks. So jQuery ensures that data is removed when DOM elements are removed via jQuery methods and when the user leaves the page. Okay, we can set several distinct values for a single element and retrieve them later. So in our case, what are we doing here? So we see that we have a data attribute, right, which has got this value. So we say the first one is we just check for, okay, whether this particular element has got the data tag name. All right, data hyphen name. You could see that this is how you're going to do it. And in the other one, we are checking the negate parts. We are checking that we do not have anything like data hyphen bar. It's that simple. All right, so this is how you are going to work on the data. Then we can also work on uh, key and value. So you could see that we are going for name and its value, and then we are also going for bar and foo. All right, so this is going to this is the negation of it. All right, and the third one is wherein the key is valid but the value is not. Right, so if I just change it to foo, right, now this will fail because I'm saying that it should not have this combination, but this combination is present on this subject. Okay, and hence it would fail. So you could see that it is being failed, negated when the element data has the key with a different value. Okay, so this one. All right, so let me change it back, save it, it will get passed. Okay, we can also, like I said, we can optionally chain it. So we can say should have this data, and then for value we say equal to, we can, right? And if you're working on a Cypress, for example, so all you have to do is, let's say you are working on this attribute, right? So you have like should have attribute this. So you're going to say like have attribute. All right, have attr and then going to pass in the value. Same way, like for example, for visibility, herein we have should be visible. So in Cypress, this is how you're going to write it, and then the syntax would be something like this. Okay. Next one is CSS, and assert that the first element of the selection has the given CSS property. Herein we are going to use the method .css, through which we apply the styling to the the collection being returned by the jQuery. So again, it is very simple. So here is our control. So what are we saying? We are checking that the subject should have CSS. So again, that's how we are going to use it. In Cypress, you're going to say just should, then inside that parentheses, two double quotes and or single quote, two single quotes, and then you say have CSS, and then you're going to provide this value. Simple, straightforward, right? So this is when you only pass in the this key. Other one is when you also pass in the value, and then you have the negations, right? Should not have. So in this list we are going to say should have and should not have. Okay, right. So this is about CSS. Then we are going to talk about property. Here also what we are going to say, when only property name is provided. So this is a property, right? And let us see that. So you could say I should have the property checked, and it can also work on the default one, because I showed you, right? So there were some attributes and there were a lot of properties, right? So some of the properties are not there or shown on the DOM, right? But they exist. Okay, and one such is disabled. All right, by default the value of it is false. So we have checked that at least this property exists on this object. All right, and it is going to return true. Okay, then we say should not have the property selected index. So on this particular control, by default this property isn't available, and also like we have not mentioned in here, so it is going to pass it this way. Okay. All right, so we have talked about property. Class is very simple. So for class, again, what are we going to use from jQuery? We are going to use, has class method. Okay, assert that the first element of the selection has the given class. And same way it's for ID. So so that the first element of the selection has the given ID, but in case of ID, we are going to use dot attr method, and in the parentheses we are going to pass in ID. Okay, so let's see these also in action. So here in for class, you could see that this element has got this class, so we're going to should have class, and for negation we are going to should not have class. And same way for ID is going to be very simple. So you're going to should have this ID foo, should not have the ID bar. All right, and you can also test it like this. You can pass in the element directly in here. So we have been passing subject, so pretty much the same thing, right? All right, so ID is also done. Next is HTML. So assert that the HTML of the first element of the selection is equal to the given HTML, and for this we are going to use the method .html. All right, so let's see that. So herein this is the element, all right, and this has got these elements inside it. Okay, so that's what we are checking here, should have the HTML. So the subject should have this. All right, that's we are verifying it here. So therefore it's passing. All right, so if you change it to let's say text, so you can change the element, or you can change the text node, and now it would fail. All right, anything you could change. So you could see that it is failing because this is something that exists. All right, this is inside the subject, but we are expecting that the subject should carry this, and hence it's failed. All right, so change it back, and it's being passed now. Okay, so the next thing that we have to check in here is text. So set that the text of the first element of the selection is equal to the given HTML. Right, again it's pretty simple, straightforward. So this is the text, right? So here I'm checking it to foo. All right, I say foo1, and I do this, and this is going to fail. The text is being failed because we are expecting foo1 to be equal to foo. All right, that's simple, right? So if you understand what is element, what is attribute, what is property, what is text, then this is pretty simple, straightforward, and just have to use the subject should have text. And for this project we are using Mocha, we are using jQuery, and we are using Chai-jQuery. So if you can so this is the uh, website for Chai-jQuery. You can find all these commands in here, and to download a project, you can go to, you can say Chai jQuery and then GitHub. Right, so if you're a developer, if and curious about how can you set up something like this, so they have provided a project in here, and you can make use of it and set up your project accordingly. Right, so here also you could see that there are quite a few things, and they have mentioned about the usage as well. Okay, so we've covered text. So the next one is value. Assert that the first element of the selection has the given value. So I've been saying first value of the selection because whenever you query a DOM element using jQuery, it always returns the collection of elements. Okay, so this assertion that we are talking about is always going to work on the first element of the selection. So make sure that you are identifying an element uniquely. Okay, so value. All right, let's see that. So this is my input element, which has got an attribute value and which has got the value as foo. All right, so I'm checking that the subject should have value foo, all right, and should not have. Pretty simple, straightforward, right? Next one is visible, but before we move on, let's understand how does this work behind the scene. So internally, all these assertions, this is how they are working. So they are making use of is method from jQuery, and inside that they are passing in the selectors. So basically I'll say filters, because in my video I've explained what are selectors and what are filters. So basically filters are used to refine the collection being returned by the selectors. Okay, and this is how we write them, pretty much like how you write pseudo classes into CSS. So we are going to check on all these, and these are all what these are the different properties available on that element. Okay, right, so the next one is visible. So here in what are we doing? So we are this is one subject. All right, we are just creating a div, nothing else. And in hidden, what we have done is we have applied the style where displays none, and hence it will not be shown. And then what are we doing? So we are just using the append to method of jQuery, right, and attaching it to the div. So this page has got a div with id Mocha. All right, so you're just appending it to it. The next one is of course this is into before and then after age. We have already seen that how these things work. So all we are doing is, okay, this should be visible and this should not be visible, right? So we have got two subject, visible and hidden. That's the name of it, so don't get subject visible and hidden. All right, so we are saying visible should not be visible. Focus on this is what you have to say. The subject name could be anything. All right, so next one is hidden. Okay, how are we working on this? Pretty much the same, right? We're just doing the opposite of it. So herein we are just saying, okay, so we have this and we have this. So we are saying that hidden should be hidden and visible should not be hidden. Just reversed the lines in our test cases. All right, so that's how you're going to work. Then we have got the selected thing. Pretty simple, straightforward again. So we have this option, all right, and we have this selected attribute which has got this value. So selected basically assert that at least one element of the selection is selected. It's that simple. Okay, and therefore we are saying that selected should be selected, unselected because there is nothing in here, right? And that's why we are saying should not be selected. So nothing is being selected in here, and in this case we are saying at least something is being selected, right? And usually we see these options inside the select uh, element, So inside select element, you have got different options, right? If one is selected, we are going to say, hey, one is selected. If none is selected from that list, from that options list, we are going to say, hey, none is selected, right? So that's how we are going to say. So you will identify the element, right, and say nothing is being selected. Okay, that's how you're going to work on drop down using this assertion. Checked, it's again like, assert that at least one element of the selection is checked, and herein we are going to use again what pretty much same I've explained in here is. Now in case of checked, it is going to be is colon checked. That's how we are going to write it. Okay, behind the scene, that's how it's being written, sorry. So for checked, what are we going to see in here? You could see the input type box is called checked, and it has got the property checked, right? So therefore we are going to say, hey, this is checked, but in this particular case, nothing is being checked, so it should not be checked. Same way, enable, disable, right, should be enabled, and as you could see again, this is property disable, right? So herein it's enable, uh, and this is how you're going to write the assertion for disable. Pretty much the same exist, we're going to check. So assert that selection is not empty. Note that this overrides the built-in Chai assertion. If the object asserted against is not a jQuery object, the original implementation would be called. So that's how you're going to write it. Should exist and should not exist. Okay. Empty is assert that at least one element of the selection is empty using again is empty method. If the object asserted against is not a jQuery object, the original implementation would be called. So you could see that this is an empty object, so we are saying, hey, this is empty. In this particular case, again, this is empty because it does not have any other elements inside it, so this is empty. All right, but in this particular case, it is not empty because it has got the span objects. All right, this is also you can, so you can identify element, and you're expecting, let's say it's a form element, you expect input boxes inside that, and then button, then you can say, hey, the form should not be empty. All right, so that's how you are going to check that out. Okay, so the next one in the list is match. Okay, so what about match? Assert that the selection matches a given selector using is method. That's it. Note that this override the built-in Chai assertion. If the object asserted against is not a jQuery object, the original implementation would be called. Let's see this. So hello should match, and you could see that this is using the regular expression, and it is returning as true. Same way, if you work on the elements, right? So how are you going to do? So you're going to say the subject should match. You just passed in the ID, all right, and this is the selector that you have passed. And same way, so you're passing in the selector inside the match method. All right, and that's why it's saying assert that the selection matches a given selector using is. And how does it is work? So check the current match element set of elements against the selector. All right, so it matches against set of element. Okay, so the next one is contains. So contain basically work on text, so that the selection contain the given text, and it uses the contains method. uh, if the object is asserted against is not a jQuery object, or if contain is not called as a function, the original implementation would be called. So how we're going to work on it? Should contain, and this example. All right, so we are working on this text. Okay, and it is not the exact match, it is the partial match. All right, should contain something, so contain always work on text. And we can also check for should not contain specific text inside it. Okay, so that's how we are going to work on. Next one is descendant. So assert that selection contain at least one element which has a descendant matching the given selector. So let's say there's a form, and you want to check whether the form component contains the submit button or not. So you're going to use, the form should have the descendant submit. All right, so that's how you're going to, so you're passing in the selectors in here. All right, next one is focus. Assert that at least one element of the selection is visible. Note that this assertion does not use dot is and then the focus filter. It rather uses when you run the jQuery, you get the uh, collection back, so it retrieves the first element from it and check that whether that's an active element or not in the document. Okay, and the reason is because of incompatibility of is focus method in certain WebKit browsers. So these are all of the assertions provided by Chai-jQuery, and I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much.